Recording starts, you'll know. All right, good afternoon, everybody. Nice to see everybody here. As I said, we're going to be starting this session now. I think the majority of people who can make it have made it. Some people might be.
So one quick question.
Yeah.
Will this recording be on the e-classroom as well?
Yeah. That's the purpose of doing the recordings. They're designed for people who may have missed the session, or for people who come in late, that kind of stuff, so they can catch up on what took place before. Hi, Miss Murray, welcome. Sort of like Miss Murray here, but she really wouldn't have missed much. All right.
Hello, sir. Sorry for late.
That's all right. That's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. All right. So first off, how are we going with the material online? Let's start with that.
So,
Yes.
that PowerPoint you sent us, sir, them slides long.
Which PowerPoint you talking about?
So all the PowerPoints you sent so far.
Yeah, they
will
tend to be long, yes, because they're covering a fair amount of data or information.
But other than that, everything good.
But all right, so my point is they may be long, but are you understanding everything?
Yes, I'm understanding everything. It's just the one you sent recently, marginal utility theory, well, the consumer behavior and
Consumer behavior. That one is one we want to go through tonight.
Yeah, kind of.
Because remember, we do 2 weeks on this, 2 weeks on this one, because marginal utility and indifference curves analysis tends to take a little bit of time to kind of wrap your head around. And that's primarily because the concept tends to be a little alien. And because it tends to also have a fair amount of graph work with it, it kind of scares people a little bit, I think. Yes? Does that make sense to you guys? So is it a good idea for us to go through that presentation?
Yeah.
All right. So the other aspect I wanted to ask about was also how are we with the quizzes in terms of where you are at this point in time. You have quiz 1, quiz 2, then we kind of jumped and we're into quiz 5 because we didn't do unit 4 is going to come up afterwards, right? Unit 3 and 4 will come up in demand and supply. All right. Oops, I have a presentation already visible here in unit 4 on elasticity. So from my remembrance, unit 5, the quiz for unit 5 closes on this Sunday. Do you all think you'll need more time for that?
Yes, please.
Yes, please.
All right. Anybody missed out on any of the other quizzes? Quiz 1 and 2?
No.
Well, that'll be for one individual.
No, I did all mine.
What was your
No,
performance? Yes, Akiba.
When I did the quiz on e-classroom, right?
Yeah.
I find every time when I end it off, you know, sometimes it'll have the little box that will have the tick. How come I'm not seeing it ticked off? Or am I supposed to tick it off myself?
When you say tick it off, what do you mean?
Because it has like these little boxes.
A checkbox. You mean a checkbox?
Yeah.
No, that's for you to do. That's more for you to monitor. All right, click, I did that already. Click, I did this already. In terms of your own checklist on the e-classroom. That is so you could check it off as this is done, and you move on. That makes sense to you?
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody else sees it from that perspective.
Yes, I saw it like that.
Right. So once you complete your all All right, I'm sharing my screen. Right, so you're seeing my screen there now. So basically what happens when you go to, all right, you're all moving across with me now to this? Is the e-classroom here?
Yes, sir.
All right, cool. So the new areas that I put in was this assignment submission portal for you to submit your assignments. And if you click on the, now what I can do is I can update these little things here and put in the deadline dates. I think I might do that because people are getting a bit confused with when everything is due. And it's, I guess, maybe causing some degree of panic. So I'll put it on the screen itself. So I'll go in here and include in the title of the submission point the deadline date, so that you can now there's a limit to how much characters I can use here. So there may be some, or I can just put a label there with some information about that. So like once you click on this, it's gonna take you to the whole see, there's one person who submitted here and needs grading, so I don't want to look at that. Right, and the due date for this is the 8th of November, so you'll have a little more time available for that activity. Has anybody used the Turnitin post? Nope. Submission inbox. Right, so Catherine has put up one. Similarity rating is 14%. That's Gibson, Catherine Gibson. All right, so that's a good comparative ratio. So in terms of similarity, this is a good report. What is the required you don't remember what the required ratio of similarity is?
15%.
Correct, on all your assignments. All right. I did tweak it a little bit so that it shouldn't include your bibliography and short codes. So just make sure you put in your appropriate citation. So everybody's okay with that. Well, quiz 1. I see 33 attempts. Should I? Let's look at the overall performance. Hey, look at that. A whole set of people scored, 23 people scored between 9.5 and 10. It's a nice little graphic, isn't it? 2 participants scored 9, and here's 8.5, 8 to 8.5, 1 participant. So, all right, this is encouraging. That means people kind of went through and showed their stuff. That's great. I'm not going to look at your individual scores with everybody there, so don't panic about that. Let's look at quiz 2, see how that went. You all finding the videos useful? The ones that I'm loading up?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. So consumer, this one is on, this is the quiz 2. See some things here, and it's not too bad. The lowest score is 7.5. The modal score is 9 to 10. 4 by 3 by 5 at 8. This is not too shabby. Everybody's doing the this is basically a C, and then of course these will be A's over here. All right, that's good. That's good. That was quiz 2. All right, so few of you all would have done this quiz by now. Quiz 5. There have been 8 attempts thus far, and this quiz is still open. Oh, look at that! All 8 attempts have been in the 9.5 to 10 range. Excellent. So that means you're all doing your work, man. Yeah, look at that. This is good. This is good. I'm quite proud of you guys. You're doing well. Even though you're complaining about the PowerPoints. I mean, all right. So today I want to look at consumer behavior with you because what comes next runs a little faster. That's demand and supply and elasticity. Okay. So what, if anything, are you all having issues with in consumer behavior? Speak. No.
Yes, sir. The only thing I don't understand is the graph part.
Which part of the group?
What you name yes, sir. Just hold on, sir. Let me just find it.
Hold on, I'm going to bring up these slides myself so that so when we start to get it, I suspect that the graph that you're having the most difficulties with would be the indifference curves.
Yes, sir. Yes, indifference curve and which one?
That might be down where we're doing the equilibrium position.
Yes, sir.
From here?
There. Yeah, all there. Yeah.
All there.
Yes, sir. I didn't understand at all. I tried to understand it, but I didn't understand it. Yeah.
Okay. So let's take it up from the top of here. Is everybody okay with me kind of recapping indifference curves with you guys?
Yes, sir, that is okay.
Yes, sir.
I know for some people they've already
that's good, sir.
all that good?
Yes, sir.
All right. So let's look at the indifference curves here then. Okay, so in the previous thing that you were looking at, you're looking at marginal utility behavior, and what you in essence saw, just for comparison, is you're looking at how people well, it's not really how people, but how the theory attempts to explain attempts to explain the behavior of humans, of us when we go about maximizing our behavior or maximizing our satisfaction. The assumption is that as rational human beings, we try to maximize the use of our resources with the goods that we're consuming. So in essence, what we're doing is maximizing our satisfaction. So every time we spend money or consume goods, we're trying to make sure that we get, at least in the marginal utility approach, we try to get the price that we paid for the last item to be equal to the satisfaction we derive from it. So we try to get them equal to 1. So when we buy a bundle of goods, what we're trying to make sure is that we will continue paying for the good once the price is greater than the utility that we experience for it. That's why we'll continue buying more. It's sort of like, you go to a roti store and you're accustomed going there, and every time you go there, you realize that your level of satisfaction for that roti that you buy is not as great as the first time you had a roti. But the next time, it's still the price that you paid for it is still greater than, sorry, the satisfaction you derive from it is still greater than the price you paid for it. So that's why you're going to continue going there. Some of you all go to certain restaurants to buy roti or buy food, and the reason why you continue buying things like KFC or you buy roti and whatnot is because what you're consuming is the price that you're paying for it is well below the amount of satisfaction that you're deriving from it. If, however, you go to this particular roti shop and you eat this roti and it doesn't taste good, and then to top that off, you get sick, what is likely to happen? Would you go back to that roti store anymore?
No, sir.
Why not?
No, sir.
Why not? From looking at the marginal utility theory, why wouldn't you go there as a logical, rational consumer? The way it's explained.
It wasn't like.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead, Mr. Brooks.
It didn't compare the amount of money I bought for it.
So the amount of satisfaction you derive from it was a lot less than the price that you paid for it.
Less, yeah.
Right? More so, the amount of satisfaction you derive from that last roti was probably what we call negative utility, because it hurt you more than it gave you any sort of benefit, which is why you may not go back to that store and buy that product anymore. All right? And that happens for a whole host of different things. So if you ever look at your grocery lists, when you go to the grocery, you'd start to notice that there's only a small number of some things, but bigger numbers of other things, primarily because of the ratio of the price that you have to pay for the product with the amount of satisfaction that's derived from the product, which is why grocery shopping is an exercise in marginal utility, because every time you put something into your basket, what you're trying to ensure is that the satisfaction that your household derives from the consumption of that good will be equal to the price that you paid for the good, and that would mean you would feel as if you have value for money. And that's a critical thing that all households have to suffer with, or they have to struggle with. That's why, how many of you in this class, participate in the grocery making for your homes?
Me.
That's one.
Me.
I do.
Me.
Do you find it that right?
Me,
How many of you are the primary breadwinner in your home? Those of you who identify that you do the shopping, how many are the primary or one of the primary breadwinners or income earners? Right.
Me.
I am
Good.
good.
So I'm going to rely on your experience. Do you have children?
Yes, sir.
Do you take them to
Yes, sir.
right? Do you take them to shop in the grocery with you?
Sometimes.
All right. Especially, do you have boys?
Yes, sir.
Right. And I'll tell you one of the things that happens, there's a big difference with men and women in this thing. Men always seem to have less patience when it comes to shopping, correct?
So true.
Right. But that might be part of the reason for that might be the fact that they weren't socialized into exercising this particular mechanism of choosing things in relation to prices and making choices for the household as opposed to making choices for themselves. Whereas most homemakers, and I'm saying homemakers because there are lots of men who are capable of doing this, they know when they go to the store to buy groceries in particular, they're not consuming goods for themselves alone. They're looking for goods for the entire household to consume. So that, and they're also trying to manage now the prices that you're paying for the item and the amount of use or satisfaction that you're going to get from that good when you get home. So in some households, you might find when you go to shop, you might pick up 4 tins, and I think I used this example somewhere. That's one of the reasons why you might have picked up 4 tins of tuna at $10 a tin, as opposed to 6 tins of tuna when it was $6 a tin, or lower price. You follow what I'm talking about? Because the satisfaction that you derive from the tuna will be greater or less in terms of the ratio of the price that you pay per tin. Now, it doesn't mean that you go home and you eat tuna whole day and whole month, because tuna is just going to be one of the different options that you have available for manufactured meals in your home. So that's why you spend your money on a number of different items, because if you eat tuna every day for a week, what will happen to you at the end of the week is that you'll be vomiting tuna because you'll be absolutely disgusted with it. That makes sense? So the idea is simply that whenever you're making decisions, and for those of you who are making these decisions, it's not easy mathematics. You're doing something called abstract mathematics. But the more practice you put into it, the easier it becomes for you to make those decisions for your household. So I would encourage all of you who may not be participating in the household activity of doing grocery shopping to do so. Get involved, because this is a skill that you can learn. But understand that this theory comes up after the fact to try and explain what people are doing. Just try and remember that. These theories are trying to describe what you are doing automatically. So if you think about it, this is a great deal of mathematics here that we're trying to describe the human behavior of consuming goods and services. And we're trying to bring into the relationship the prices that we pay, the satisfaction that we derive. Now, when we go to, something's wrong with this slide. All right, so when we go to utility in difference curves analysis, tries to use a slightly different technique where instead of only looking at one good, it's going to look at combinations of goods. So any indifference curve shows a combination of two goods that those combinations would yield the same amount of satisfaction to a consumer. So when we look at the graph, each one of these items here, each one of these combinations, this is pears and oranges, where we could substitute into this diagram, you know, something like mangoes and sapodillas, something like that. And we can look at various combinations that yield the same level of satisfaction. So each indifference curve here, this indifference curve, each one of these combinations, A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, all yield the same level of satisfaction to this consumer. Now, again, this is very subjective, but it starts to take the subjectiveness of our response to try and map out a more objective manner of looking at it. So we have to remember, again, this is going to be subjective in the sense that, how many of you all like pears?
Me, sir.
I like pears.
Yeah. And what about oranges? Do you like oranges?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Are there any individuals there who don't like any one of those products?
I don't like pears.
You don't like one?
I don't like pears.
Yeah.
You don't like pears?
No.
No.
Right. And I have a problem with oranges. I can't use them anymore. The acid from it hurts my joints because of the amount of citric acid in it. So I usually stay away from it. So again, for different people, it'll be different combinations because of your preference for goods. That's why the indifference curve theory kind of relates to preference. All right. However, so we could put any two goods there that are related to each other on this. I usually, when I do this in class, I don't use pears and oranges. I use chicken and chips, or fry fowl and aloo. That's the way I used to look at it. Because fry fowl and aloo, based upon that analysis, is really chicken and chips, you know, a box of dead. So, so people might see that that combination a little easier. What the theory starts to indicate to you is that the shape of the indifference curve is important because it tells us something. And if the other features, like it's downward sloping from left to right, meaning that it represents the marginal rate of substitution, which is, if you go back to the diagram now, As we move from A to B, you'd realize that to get from A to B, you have to give up 6 units of pears to get 1 unit of oranges. All right. Now at this position here, you have 6 oranges. At A, you have 6 oranges and 30 pears. So obviously you have more pears than you have oranges. So like with any human being, when you have a lot of something.
So can you repeat that over?
Which part? When you move from A to B, that part?
Yes, sir.
Right. You have to give up 6 units. You see, you're going from A to B. You go from 30 to 24 pairs. So you give up 6 units of pears to get 6 to 7, 1 orange. So you give up 6 units of pears or 6 pears to get 1 orange. Now, why would that consumer do that? And that's because if we look at the position A, you have 30 pears and only 6 oranges. So when you have a lot of one thing and a little of another, you find that the item that you have less of becomes more precious to you because you're realizing that you only have a small number. That makes sense? So you'll be quite willing to give up a fairly large proportion of your pairs, in this case 6 pairs, to get 1 additional unit of oranges, one orange more. All right. Now we're at B. Yes, go ahead. You're following that?
Yes, sir.
So at B, we now have 24 pears and 7 oranges. So you still have more pears than oranges. So if we have to go from B to C, you're going to give up from B to C. You're talking about 20 pairs. So you're giving up an additional 4 to probably get an additional 1.5 units of oranges at point C. Seeing that? So you're still giving up more of one to get get 1 more unit of another. Then when we go to D, you're now at a combination where you have 10 oranges and roughly maybe here it looks like about 15, just about 15 or 14 pairs. Now what's starting to happen is that the number of pairs to oranges that you have in your basket or your bundle is starting to get more even. And it means you still have slightly more pairs, but you only have a few oranges. Still have a few oranges. So if you move from D to E, you'd realize you're at 10 oranges here, and as I said, about 14 here. Now, so you're giving up an additional 14 to get to E. All right. And that additional 14 takes you from 10 to 13. So you get 3 more oranges. So you give up 4 here to get 3 here. Now, what's happening is the rate at which you're substituting pairs for oranges is diminishing as you move down the curve. If it was that we were going to listen, I wanna try something here. See if this might help a little bit. If we were going to consume, all right, let me just check and see what's happening with my camera here. All right, so I'm adding a device here to my laptop, so bear with me a second because I might be able to help you a little bit with this. If I can get this to work. But you're following that marginal rate of substitution concept idea?
Yeah.
All right.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. But if you could just explain one more time, just go through it fast. That would be nicer.
Just do it fast. That's what you said.
Like one more time.
All right, hold on. This is why I think I want to use this. Hold a second. Yeah, I know I'm presenting. Nope, that's not it. All right, next time I'll have to charge this. I think seem to be having some charge issues with this. All right, what I was going to do was try and illustrate to you what happens with it using some all right, let's go through it again, and this is kind of wasting time here right now. I'll see if I can get this up for next class. All right, so when you're moving from one point A to B to C to D, you're giving up one certain number of goods on one axis for the other goods on the other axis. As you have more of one good, that good becomes more available and more abundant. And with human nature, what happens, those things that we have a lot of, we tend to not value as much as those things we have little of. Because you have to remember, in this model, there are only two goods. There's only pears and oranges. Now, it's not really very realistic, but just if we were in an abandoned island and all there was available was pears and oranges, you'd find yourself, looking at things from that perspective, because there are only two things you can get. So that as you have more of one thing and you get easily fed up of it, you're quite willing to give up a lot of it to be able to get more of the thing that you have less of, which is the oranges in this case. That's the movement along the curve from A to B to C to D to F. Now at F, you're at a situation where you're seeing that you have 8 pears and 15 oranges. Now that means now you have more oranges than pears, and that simply means that you're going to have a situation where you're going to value pears more than value oranges more than you have pears. So as you move towards one end of the curve where you have more of the other good, your rate of substitution, the amount of one good that you're willing to give up for the other, diminishes. That's why what we talk about here is the marginal rate of substitution as you move downward from left to right along the curve reflects your willingness to give up one for the next, which we call the marginal rate of substitution. And that marginal rate of substitution displays a particular characteristic. That characteristic is that you never want to be without any of the two goods. But as you have less of one good, it becomes more important to you, and therefore you'll be willing to give up. To be able to give up another unit that you have less of, you'll have to give up a lot more of the other one that you don't have, that you have so much in, so that it becomes, more precious to you. So this is one of the reasons why, for example, if you think about chicken and chips, if you're eating a plate of chicken and chips and you have 10 pieces of chicken and 2 fries, you'll be willing to give up a good bit of chicken to get more fries, correct? That makes sense?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
All right, but then if you end up on the other side, the same plate, you have a big keep it set half the plate full of fries and you have one little wing, you'd be quite willing to give up a lot of your fries to get some more chicken. You understand?
Yes, sir.
The idea is maybe if you end up more in the middle where you have a fairly decent proportion of, like, maybe you have a two piece and a portion and a half of fries, that might be good for you to settle it. The objective would be, where's your optimum combination? But we can't get to the optimum combination just yet because we have to put into this model another element that we talk about. But the slope is trying to describe our behavior. So again, remember, what I'm saying to you guys is that indifference curves analysis is trying to describe behaviors that have already been observed by people in relation to what people actually do. So it's not that you're greedy. That's why when you go somewhere and you see a mountain of rice on a plate and a little bit of meat sitting on it, you get kind of vexed. And Tamalai. Right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So you want, especially if you have meat mouth like some of us, you're really in the mood, you know, to eat some meat, but you can't get on meat because, you know, I don't know if you have ever, well, in my life, meat was something that we had primarily on weekends, simply because the fact of the matter was that meat was a kind of precious item, in the sense that it was expensive relative to starches. That makes sense?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
So
sir.
historically, on a weekend, we would use historically on a weekend we would use our we would have meat on a weekend then. So let's put it that way. Whoops, oh, it works now. Okay, great. So let's all right. So as you move from this point here to that point here, you realize that you've given up a great deal of pairs to get to that. So the point I was trying to make to you is that because we didn't eat meat very often, we ate meat only on weekends, for example, it meant that when you got your plate, you wanted to see more meat on it, eh? And that never used to happen.
Yeah.
Especially as a child growing up, you only get these small pieces. So the person in the house that used to get the most amount of meat used to be your father, and the men in the house, they used to be getting one set of damn meat. And of course, pissed me off all the time. They getting more meat than you. So that's one of the reasons why, if you look at the behavior of people in the West Indies, we eat everything else and leave the meat for last. You ever realize that?
Yes.
No,
That's
no one ever
the-
told them.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. All right. So that's again, is because I'm sure you'd have been quite willing to give up. So if instead of pears we have rice, and this is the number of pieces of meat on this side here, when you have plenty of rice in your plate, you're going to want to give up some of that rice or whatever it is you're eating with the thing to get more meat on your plate, and that's your rate of substitution. But even now, if you end up with a plate full of meat and very little rice, the food don't taste the same. You just need something, you know, to mix, to go in the mix. You can't eat meat alone. Let's put it that way. So as you move from one end of the curve to the other end of the curve, so if you move from this end here to this end here, you realize that you can't just keep all of them. You have to start to change your behavior, or else you're going to end up being unsatisfied. So that's basically what happens when it comes to that. All right, so far you're following that. So that brings us to these positions here, where it speaks to the shape. So the downward sloping from left to right, that's because of the marginal rate of substitution. It's convex to the origin because you're never going to get the the two curves touching the axes at all, because that will mean you'll end up with a situation where you have 0 of one thing and only one good, and that's not something you want. All right, and that therefore tells us that there is a diminishing marginal rate of substitution. So if we go back again to the previous slide, you realize that as we move from one end to the other, as you get less and less of one good, that good becomes more precious to you. That's why the curves will never touch the X or Y axis, because they'll always pull away. You will always want to have at least one of those items. You're not going to go without any. That makes sense? So like, you know, that's your last piece of meat on the plate. You ain't giving up. You ain't giving up. You ain't taking any more. There's no amount of fries that will compensate for that last piece of chicken leg that you have there. Making sense?
Yes, sir.
All right, so let's move to the other features here. Now, as with anybody who's a human, we have unlimited ones. So what you're looking at here is something called an indifference curve map. So it means that because we have unlimited ones, each one of these indifference curves, as we move away from the origin, represents higher and higher levels of satisfaction that we can consume. But if you draw a straight line across here, so if we draw a line from here going across, look, I lost the all right, so if we take a line and we go across here, well, let's imagine that was a straight line, okay? Actually, there's a way to make a straight line. Use a straight edge, huh?
What's all that static?
I think somebody's mic is still open. All right, so if we all right, so if we draw a straight line across here, for crap's sake, come on. All right, and we look at each one of these positions, you'd realize that you have the same level of unit Y here, but every time you move from one curve to the next, you'd realize that you have to get larger and larger quantities of good X to make that a different combination. Making sense? So you have much larger here, 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 here in terms of the amount of X that we have to get. So even though we may have one constant amount of Y, the combination of X that goes along with that amount of Y has to be greater and greater for us to move up this in this direction. As we move away from the origin, what we're talking about here is greater levels of satisfaction as we move out. That makes sense? And that is because we have unlimited ones. Now, what therefore would restrict us? All right, so let's just go through this here. So that's everything is, as we move forward, we're talking about higher and higher levels of satisfaction, okay? So notice that as the bundles of both goods are increasing as we move outwards. So another feature is that indifference curves cannot intersect. Everybody kind of got this point? It means that at this point A here, you have two bundles of the same quantities of X and Y. Let's say we have this amount by this amount here. Let's say this was 4 units here and 6 units of Y here. That means to this consumer, 4 units of good X and 6 units of good Y represents 2 separate levels of satisfaction simultaneously. Now, because we're dealing with rationality here, that cannot happen. The only way that can happen is if the person has split personality. All right. So again, the question there is that possible? No, it's not. It's not something that we're going to consider. So that's why indifference curves do not intersect with each other. Then we have the parallel question. You realize that these lines don't have to be parallel because, I mean, if you think about it, chicken and fries, they are not good substitutes for each other. That making sense? if we look at it from the point of view of nutritional value, you realize that starches and proteins are two different food groups. So therefore, they can't be good substitutes for each other. Similarly, pears and oranges, as in the example that we've been looking at, they're not perfect substitutes for each other. They may be relatively close in that we consider them both to be fruits, but at the same time, they are not going to be perfectly substitutable. And because they're not substitutable, it means that there's no need for us to be, there's no need for the curves here to be parallel to each other. That makes sense? Because if they were parallel to each other, they will indicate that the goods are perfectly substitutable between the two. That makes sense, guys?
Yes, sir.
Now, for ease of construction, when you see the diagrams in the future, you're going to see us draw them parallel to each other. But that is primarily because we just kind of lazy, you know. We don't want to be doing the hard thing of it. All right. So in the future, you're going to see the indifference curves are going to be drawn relatively parallel to each other, reflecting that that situation moving forward. So far, so good. All right. Okay. So this is the indifference curves map, and the question is, so we now have the preferences that we want in relation to the goods, correct? The indifference curves map shows us our preferences. What we have to now look at is the limitation of our budget, and that brings us to the budget line. A budget line shows the limitations or the fiscal limitations or the financial limitations faced by a consumer when making a decision. So this is the reason why the indifference analysis approach tends to be a little stronger, because you can see here now that the model now requires that we have an income, a known income, and we must know the prices of the two goods. Once we have the income, so we fix the income, and this kind of works out when we go to the grocery to buy goods and services. We don't go there and just haphazardly pick up stuff. We go there with a known budget in mind. We know that, okay, for the month, I'm not spending more than $1,000, $3,000, $2,000, depending upon the size of your household, because there are other things that you have to do with that money that you get. So that it kind of reflects the reality that we face, where we have a situation where we have fixed levels of incomes that we can utilize on the purchase of the different goods. So in this model here, we're going to simplify it. We say, okay, we have $30. The price of good Y is $1 per unit, and price of good X is $2 per unit. Now, how do we draw straight lines? What do you need to draw a straight line? Let's go to your mathematics now. How do you construct a straight line? Nobody wants to say anything? Or did I lose my connection?
So
Yeah.
indeed 2 points, you know, to construct a straight line.
Very good. So once you have at least 2 coordinates, you could calculate more than 2. You can draw a straight line. That makes sense? So the easiest way to construct a straight line is to make one of the coordinates is equal to 0. So the thing we say, if we spend all our money on good Y and none on good X, then we'll end up having, at a price of $1 for good Y, we're going to end up with our first area here. That makes sense? At A. And then we switch over and we say, if we spend all our money on good X and none on good Y, this is where we end up with 15 here. That makes sense? So this is actually 15 here. All right? So I'm not writing a wholesome, but at the same time, I'm not trying to get used to this little device that I have here. All right? So when we connect these two lines, this here provides that budgetary restriction that we're talking about. So the consumer can consume anything that's on this line or back. So this area we call as being attainable. Whereas this area here is beyond their budget, so it's unattainable. That makes sense? So we can afford everything from this line, on this line, back to here. Any bundle that falls into this region here, we can afford. Any bundle that is outside of this region, we simply do not have the budget to get. So far, so good. So that brings a new element to the analysis. It brings prices of two goods, an income level, and it therefore shows our what we call our fiscal or financial limitations or budgetary limitations. All right. So that takes us here. So so that's why I was saying here, you can't attain anything outside this region, only within the white region here, from the line onwards. So what is the objective now? So I went through the construction here, all right? So the slope of the line, what does this slope represent? The slope of this line is calculated utilizing the prices of the goods given the level of income that we have. So that the slope of this line, as you can see over here, represents the ratio of prices. If the price of one of those goods were to change, you would notice that the curve the slope of the line will curve. But if incomes were to change and not prices, you would end up with the curve, it's not the curve, the budget line shifting to the right or to the left, depending upon the nature of the change. So I think I illustrated that here. So we said here that the price of good X went from $2, it fell from $2 to $1. So when the price fell, everybody following this one here, right? So when the original situation was AB. What that was the 30 units of good Y and the 15 units of good X. So when the price of good X fell from $2 to $1, you'd notice that the budget line pivoted in this direction here, moving to 30. That makes sense? Why would it go to 30? Because at $1 I can now spend, if I spend all my money on good X, I will end up at a new position here at 30 and the other coordinate is 0. All right. So now this budget line reflects the new ratio of prices of $1 to $1. All right. For those of you who are mathematically involved, this would be at a 45-degree angle here and a 45-degree angle here, perpendicular to the origin. Forgetting maths, right? Don't panic about that. But the whole point would be that the budget line pivoted outwards. If, however, the prices had gone back down or gone back up, you'd see the budget line pivoting inwards in this direction. So that what you start to recognize here is that the slope of the line is changed by the price levels. So therefore, that the slope of the line represents the relative prices of one price for the other. So far, so good. Everybody's following that.
Yes, sir.
All right, good. So then we move on to the income move. So here we have the original budget at $30. That's the blue line here. And then we increased our budget by $10 or 10 pounds as the case is in this here. And that means that now we went back to the original price, right? So the price of X is still $15, sorry, $2 per one. So with the original situation here. So this is 15 here. All right. So that means that now that we have $40, we can buy 20 units of good X or 40 units of good Y. Connect those two lines, you realize that the budget line shifts outwards parallel. So if your budget actually went down and not up, then you would have a shift of the line to the other direction. Making sense so far? Yes? So if the budget line, if the budget line shifted outwards, it means that your income, if it went in this direction, it meant that your income increased. But if it went in this direction, from this budget line to this budget line, your income would have fallen. All right. The opposite is true if we go back to the price change here. If the budget line pivots in this direction, it means prices fell. But if it moved in this direction here, it meant that prices rose. Okay, prices of good X in particular. Good Y is pivoting around good Y because the price of good Y did not change. Making sense? Yes?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right, somebody has a question. Go ahead.
Could you repeat the last part?
What I was kind of summing up was I was saying that if you have a budget line swinging outwards or pivoting outwards, it means that the price of the good here X got cheaper. If it pivoted in the other direction, it meant that the price of good X got more expensive. It went up. All right.
Okay.
That making sense? And when we went to the income level, we said if your income increased, then your budget line would pivot outwards. Not pivot, but will shift outwards. But if it didn't, if it went down, it'll go this way. It'll come inwards towards the origin. Now, the more important thing for us to look at here is that the budget lines are parallel to each other in this diagram. Why are they parallel? Because in this case here, the only thing that changed was an income change. And that income change meant that the ratio of prices didn't change from one price to the other. So that's why they're parallel. They're parallel because the ratio of prices did not change between the two. So that's why they hold, it's a parallel shift and it holds to that particular situation there. That makes sense? Yes? No?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
All right.
sir.
Yeah.
At any point in time, feel free to ask a question, guys. If you want.
Yes, sir.
All right, so let's go to the next one. Now, consumer equilibrium. The consumer equilibrium now brings both of these concepts together. Our indifference curves, remember, shows us our preferences. Our budget line shows us our ability to afford things, our budgetary constraint. So to be in equilibrium, what you want to do is you want to be consuming at the highest level of satisfaction attainable given my current salary or my current income. And that will be this position here, T. All right. At that position here, my income allows me to be tangential to this indifference curve I3. Seeing that? Now, why not here at S or at R or at U or at V or even one of these other curves here? Well, I can't afford anything on I4, indifference curve 4, or indifference curve 5. You're seeing that? And
Yes.
and what we can look at is that position S and R represents lower levels of satisfaction because that is along I1, R is along I1, and S is along I2. My objective is to get to the highest point or the highest indifference curve I can get to given my income. And the highest one I can get to is this one here. Now, it doesn't mean that there isn't more indifference curves. Huh? So between any two indifference curves, there will exist another setup. So in essence, therefore, that between any two indifference curves, there exists another one. God, that is real horrible drawing, boy. Already, whoops. Let's go back to that. All right. So you're understanding what I'm trying to say to you is that between any of these curves here, there exists another one. Of course, they don't touch each other, right? Like that one there. Oh my God, that's horrible. All right, that makes sense? Okay, so
Yes, sir.
the point of tangency is at the point of tangency, there's something that's happening. And at that point of tangency, remember, what does the indifference curve represent and what does the budget line represent? So the budget line represents the ratio of prices, whereas the indifference curve represents the ratio of your marginal rate of substitution, the amount of that you're willing to substitute of one good for the other. So what's happening there is when they are tangential to each other. Tangential means what? What is it? What does tangential mean to anybody? Come guys, anybody? They are what? A point of tangency is a point where a curved surface is sitting on a flat line. Think about a ball resting on the floor. That makes sense? So when a ball is resting on the floor, the entire ball is not sitting on the floor. It's just the one curved point that is going to be touching that particular point there. That makes sense?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
All right. And at that point, guys, what's happening is that at that point of tangency, remember each curve, the curve and the line represent different things. It means that the ratio of prices here, as seen from the budget line, is equal to the marginal rate of substitution that is seen from the gradient of the indifference curve. So if the two of them are equal, what you're equating there is the ratio of prices for one good for the other to the rate at which you're willing to exchange one good for the other. All right. So the mathematics of it is pretty we won't go into the mathematics, but it's just that it's a mathematical issue that's taking place there. That point of tangency has mathematical consequences. But what you would recognize is that all of the person's income is being spent at that point in time on the two goods. And they are, in fact, getting the highest quantity of satisfaction possible given the income and given their tastes and preferences. So far, so good? And that's what that's what these equations here are trying to show you. So that these equations over here, these equations here represent the slope of the budget line. This equation here represents your marginal rate of substitution, and they made a comparison now between what you looked at here to the indifference curves analysis. I'm sorry, the marginal utility analysis down here. That makes sense? So that this here speaks to the marginal utility, but in essence, what you end up happening is that the ratio of prices, good Y to good X, or good X to good Y, is equal to the rate of marginal substitution, which represents your marginal utility of good X to good Y again. So there, again, it's about equating things. That makes sense? All right, so that's the mathematics of it, but don't panic about it because I'm not going to test you about the mathematics of it. I'm going to set any math questions on those things. All right, it's just representative, and I just want you all to understand what's happening there. Now, what we went on to, any problems with that equilibrium position? So that's what all consumers want to do, and they want to get to equilibrium. So far, so good?
Yes, sir.
All right, anybody else? Okay, so this diagram here is showing you a couple of other things. So we have a series of income changes. And how do we know their income changes? Anybody wants to explain that to me? How do we know that this movement here represents a number of income changes? Anybody?
Because the income line, it kept going outwards parallel.
Yeah, but what do we look at here that represents the income changes? What here represents a change in income?
So the budget line.
What happened to the budget line?
Budget line keep
Forward, how it's going up.
All right, so this is where sometimes the problem comes up. So let's see if I can get this to work now. All right, so you're gonna have, you're seeing this on whiteboard, right?
Yes,
all right.
Yes, sir.
So remember, we have a situation. This is our x-axis, sorry, y and x-axis, right? So this is good X here. This is too thick. Let's use about that. All right, and this is good Y here. Now, remember we constructed a budget line by simply determining from that's one budget line, making sense? And then in order to show a change in income, we had a parallel shift of the budget line going outwards. That makes sense? So that what we did.
When you say a change in income, does it mean an increase in income?
Well, it depends on the direction, because if it didn't indicate, if we say this was B1, we started there, this is B2, and then B3. It depends on where you started. If you were at B3 and then you went back to B2 and then back to B1, then it meant that your income levels fell. But if you started from B1 and then moved to B2 and then to B3, then your incomes increased, correct?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So right.
Yes, sir.
So the next thing we want to look at is what happens, therefore, is that each time we move from one indifference curve to one budget line to the other, it allowed us to move from one indifference curve to another like that. You seeing that? And that means it allowed us to move from one equilibrium position here to another one here and the other one here. So that when we connected those points to each other, it gave us that income consumption the income consumption line or curve. That makes sense? So that's what that diagram was trying to illustrate to you when we went to that particular thing. All right? That's what this is. That's what this is trying to represent to you. So from here to here, they made 4 changes in the budget line, which meant they changed income 3 times. So the first time it changed, we went from B1 to B2, then from B2 to B3, and then B3 to B4. So what that led to is a movement from equilibrium point R to S to T to V. And we connected those income, those equilibrium points, and that gave us a new curve that showed us the income consumption curve or line. That shows us the relationship between changes in income and changes in your consumption. Now, this holds in the real world. When people earn larger incomes, what happens?
They spend more money.
There you go. So generally, if the good is normal, and we're going to learn about that in the next unit, we're simply going to buy more goods and services. So both of these 2 goods, we consider them to be normal goods. So therefore, if our income rises, we're going to buy more. And therefore, that shows us a normal reaction. All right, that's one of the things that we talk about here. So the line joining these points is known as the income consumption curve, which represents the relationship between changes in your income and your consumption, and the related increases in consumption or decreases, because they similar. It can work in the opposite direction as well. If your incomes fall, the level of consumption will also fall. That makes sense?
Yes, sir.
Because you can no longer afford them. Yeah, that makes sense?
Yes, sir.
All right. Okay, so
Go
let's go ahead.
How I should say this is it depends on how you look at it. So you could look at it from the right side or the left side, depending on the person's income.
It depends upon the situation, and the reality is that the relationship can go in either direction. The reason for it is because if your income started at B4 and then went down to B1, it shows one direction of the relation. So it's in either direction that we can have the change taking place. As in the real world around us, incomes go up and they go down. And as a result of that, you find out your consumption levels reflect your changing levels of income. I mean, consider, for example, now the situation that's facing a lot of families where some of the income earners have now lost their jobs due to the lockdown situations or the reduced demand for the good or service. And that means that household is experiencing shifts in their income levels in to the left, because that's the direction that their income is moving. It's moving in this direction here. That movement there means that the households are experiencing losses in income, and therefore they are going to be suffering through the heartache of having to reduce the levels of consumption in their home, because they don't have a choice, because they don't have the income levels that they had before. It doesn't mean that their demand has changed. They still want more and more, but they can no longer afford more and more. They have to afford less. So far, so good? The
Yes,
person
sir.
who just asked that question. Now, when I'm presenting like this, I don't know who's speaking, so it'll be nice for you to identify who you are. Who asked that last question there? You get the idea that they can work in both directions.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right, so let's look at the next one here. This one here is one that we're going to spend a little more time on. This is the effect of a fall in price. So this is what we're looking at, one thing here. So if the price fell, we know already that the budget line would pivot outwards. Now, the price that changed was the price of good X. So we went back and we said the price of good X moved from $2 to $3, from $2 to $1. That allows the budget line, you realize this budget line shifted outwards from here to here. All right, from B1 to B2. Now, you were originally at J.
So,
Yes? Go ahead.
can you repeat that again, please?
All right, so I know what I'll do. Let me reconstruct this again from let me construct this from the all right, whoops. All right, so first thing, undo. Crap. Let's get through that. All right, what I wanted to do was just clean the board before we start. All right, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start by reconstructing that entire element there. So we're going to start with, I'm going to try to do this as neatly as possible. We're going to start with our, so again, we are at, this is good X, and this is good Y here. All right. Now, we're gonna start with, and I'm not gonna put values on it, but I want you all to follow. Our initial budget line starts here, and we'll call that budget line A, B. So far, so good. Now we're saying that at AB we would have been in equilibrium. All right, let me just take off this one first. And change the color so that we could see that. So we'll be in equilibrium at, let's say, this position here, and we'll call that E1. Lord, what in God's heaven is that? All right, let's call that E1. All right. So what we want to demonstrate here is that the price of good X were to fall. All right. So the first thing that happens is we have to change our ink color first. And y'all could crack up if you want, and that's not a big deal. So if price of good X fell, then what's going to happen is that the budget line is going to pivot outwards. All right. I don't have a ruler here. Let me see if I can pull this straight. So it's going to pivot outwards like that. And I'm going to do it a few times. All right. So we have a new budget line. This is AB, this is AC, and this is AD. Making sense? That allows us to move from E1 to another indifference curve here. Let's say that's to another one here. Seeing that? So we went from E1 to E2 to E3 up here. Now, if we were to connect these points, try the rainbow pen, from this one to that one to that one, that gives rise to a new relationship, which we call, this line here is called the price consumption curve. All right, that makes sense? That price consumption curve shows the relationship between change in price and change in consumption. Now, you see these things here I'm drawing, they're deltas, all right? Well, that one don't want to cooperate. Delta means change, all right, in our thing, okay? So that the price consumption curve is mapping here the relationship between changing prices with the changing levels of consumption. So what's happening here? You'd notice that every time the budget line pivots outwards, we're moving from this indifference curve here to that indifference curve there to this indifference curve here. And we're increasing. This is I1 to I2 to I3. That helps, guys? This helps? Or is this more confusing? All right. So if we go back now to especially Mr. Cooper, Mr. Brooks, sorry, my bad. Now in this diagram here, they only move the price once. That makes sense? So in moving the price once, the budget line pivoted outwards from B1 to B2, giving us these two equilibrium points from J to K. And they connected those two because with a line, you only need 2 points, but with the curves, you need actually more than 2 points, okay? So that's generally why we tend to illustrate. And you realize that we move from I1 here to I2 here, and there are two new points, or 2 points that were connected to each other, that gives us the price consumption curve. And that is what is showing you the relationship between the changes in price and the changes in consumption. Now, when we start to look at normal goods, this is something that that actually factors into that. All right, you all actually have a question that deals with that in your individual assignment, not so? With Giffen goods and Veblen goods and stuff like that?
Yeah, cool.
Yes, sir.
Sound like somebody talking with their mouth full. Or even, I can't eat too. All right, so we're following that particular thing because we're going to use this analysis here now to go to something a little more complicated in a little bit. And this is probably where things fell apart when you were going on your own. So now, the consumption, so this is just to summarize what we were just looking at there in terms of the income consumption curve and the price consumption curve. And you'd notice that in this case here, we're using some assumption, assuming that the price of goods remain constant. So it means that holding to the behavior of firms in relation to the theory. We're gonna change one thing at a time. We're not gonna change everything simultaneously, or else it becomes confusing for us to be able to track what happens. So in the first case here, we're moving, we're changing incomes only, holding prices constant. And down here with the price consumption curve, we are holding incomes constant and changing prices. So far, so good. That makes sense? All right. So now we come to one of the tricky ones here. This is the one that probably gave you the most amount of problems. This is called the income and substitution effect of a price change. That makes sense? That's what they look at. So let me go back to the whiteboard and try and reconstruct this for you. And hopefully you'll be able to see how they ended up there, right? Because that's the part of the problem that comes with what was it? I really like some grid lines on this. All right, forget it. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is, again, we're going to draw the axes. So I'm going to do that a little bigger. I'm going to try and do it a little larger for you guys. So this is our x-axis and our y-axis. So this is, again, this is good x, and this is good y. All right. Now, what we're looking at here is we're going to look at a price change and then evaluate it from the two changes that takes place. So we're going to start first off by having a budget line, our initial budget line. Let's call that budget line A, B.
So
Yes.
I think you could use the little ruler icon at after the bottom to draw a straight line.
No, it just puts a big line up, a big ruler up. I'm not sure if it actually would work. Let's see. And then what? Oh, that looks nice. But I need that. All right, so I know what I'll do. I'll do this. You must get frustrated watching me trying to play the ass of this, huh? Hey, no laughing alone, man. All right. I have to learn how to manipulate that ruler because that's actually a pretty nifty thing there. But all right, so let's say this is our original budget line A, B. All right, but we want to. So then, how do I? See, I don't know how to shift it. Oh, no, I don't want that. I want to pivot it. Yeah, well, that ain't making sense. All right, so now what I want to do is I want to pivot the line outwards. That is the worst pivot I ever seen in my life. All right, let me see if I can get this here. And I'll learn how to walk it like that. All right. All right. So we now have a new budget line, and we'll call that point AC. Now, what it means is that we would have moved from this indifference curve here to a new indifference curve up here. You see that? So we move from I1 to I2. All right? That's this point here to this point here. So we would move from E1 to E2 all the way here. Now, what the theory tells us is that the change from E1 to E2, not E1, all right, is in fact made up of two changes that the consumer experiences when prices change. So in this case here, we had a pivoting of the budget line outwards from B to C. So what does that mean? What happened to prices? So remember, we went from B to C here, okay? What does that mean in terms of prices of
For
which good?
for good X.
Right. So what are we are therefore assuming, we're making some assumptions. We're assuming that price PX rose up, not fell, right? PY is constant. And then Y, which, well, let me change that for you guys. So that for now, let's just call it I, income, is also constant, correct? So those are some assumptions that we're making, or that is implied in this this diagram here. Now, what economists are saying, or what the analysis tells us, is that the movement from E1 to E2 is actually made up of two effects that the consumer feels. All right, so the two effects that they feel is, one is called the substitution effect, and the other is the income effect. All right, now the substitution effect is dependent on the consumer attempting to maintain their current levels of satisfaction. Now, let me draw a parallel for you guys. If you're at home relaxing and you're in your Zen place, all right, and you're really comfortable, and somebody comes knocking at your door, what happens? Does that not affect your ability to stay in that comfortable situation? Are they negatively impacting on your
Peace. Yes, sir.
peace, right? So when they leave, what do you want to do?
Find back the comfort zone.
Return to the comfort zone.
Yeah, right. So you want to get back into that level of satisfaction that you were at before, that level of comfort, right? So that's what this position represents here. This position here represents a position of satisfaction and comfort that you've arrived at. Remember, we said it is not easy getting into levels of satisfaction. It's difficult work. All right. So what the consumer is going to do is that they're going to attempt to try to stay at this level of consumption here, or this level of satisfaction. Now, how are they going to do that? Well, the economist is going to say, and this time I really do need to get a ruler. So give me, all right, guys, give me about 2 minutes. I'm going to have to look for a ruler somewhere. You all want to take a 5-minute break, and we'll come back at this point?
Yes.
So one question.
Yep.
So equilibrium basically is your place of comfort.
Yes, when you are comfortable at equilibrium levels, you are in fact going to be experiencing a degree of satisfaction that puts you in like a Zen place. That makes sense?
Okay, yes.
Right. So we'll come back to that point. Just remind me, and we'll start from there. Let me just go and find a small ruler that I can use. All right. Let's take 5 minutes. Stretch your legs a little bit. It's 7:12. Yeah, we're back killing as well. So I'll be back in a little bit. What I should have done actually was turn off my camera. It takes off less issues at this point. right, guys, sorry about that. Found my ruler. Are you back? I should have stopped the recording, but I didn't.
Yes, sir.
All right. So if we get back to the diagram, everybody's following this so far, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So remember I said the substitution effect that we're trying to show. There are two effects that took place for the movement from E1 to E2, an income effect and a substitution effect. So what we want to do is we want to remove one of the impacts. So how do we represent well, how do we do that? We take, first off, we take a line that is, let me actually do this in green. All right. We take a line that is parallel to the new budget line, AC, but tangential to the indifference curve I1. Why? Because, and that's what I'm trying to get here now. So we want a budget line. Whoops. Okay, so I need to erase that, erase that, erase that. All right, so we want a budget line that is tangential to the indifference curve. Sorry, is parallel to the new budget line, because that shows the new ratio of prices. But we want to bring it down to our first indifference curve here. Let's see, this is it. Excuse my fumblings at this point in time. All right, so crap. Let's see if I can get this here first. All right, so what we're looking for is we're looking to construct now a budget line that is tangential, sorry, parallel to AC, but tangential. So it'll be somewhere about here, so like that. Here. So we'll end up with a new tangential point here. We'll call this point E3 here. Or actually, instead of 3, I'll call it ES. Let's see if that kind of works. So how did this budget line come about? That budget line is a result of it's parallel to the AC line, and we'll label this A prime C prime. This point here, if you can make it out in all the nonsense that I have around it, just for argument, let me just refresh this curve here a little bit. All right, so this is our original point here, and this is our new indifference curve here, because we have our budget line here. All right, so what I'll do this over again so that you all could see it a little clearer. So what happens is that from here to here is the substitution effect, because what ended up happening is our, well, it's actually somewhere here, isn't it? All right, so from this is our original E1 position here. This is the E2 position, the substitution effect. So from From this here, from X1 to X2 represents the substitution effect. And then with the income effect, we will come all the way out here to X3. All right. You'd also notice that the consumption of Y has increased as well. So what happened in the first instance as we move from this point here to this point here was that we were looking at the substitution effect where we're trying to maintain our level of satisfaction at I1. But we are doing so by looking at the new ratio of prices. So remember, the ratio of prices is seen through the slope of the budget line. That's why we put this green budget line there, AC prime, as parallel to the budget line AC, but tangential to the first indifference curve I1. Because again, the person came in whom they disturbed you, and what you're trying to do is to get back to where you were before, which is E1. But you can't, because what has happened is that the price ratio has changed. So that in moving from X1 to X2, you're still maintaining that particular level of satisfaction. But what happens is the area representing your budget line or your budget constrictions or restrictions has now changed, because now you've gone from the area, and this area is actually OAB, to now OAC. So you realize that you have more income. So you're going to end up with more income that allows you to move from X2 to X3 up to E2 here, which is allowing you consumption of more of both X and Y. Because if you look at what's happening here at E1, you're consuming this level here. Let's call this Y1 level of goods. With the substitution, as the price of good X got cheaper, what you did was you bought more X but gave up good Y. So you move down to a lower level of Y here. So you went to, let's call that Y0. And what ended up happening is that you ended up with change. You ended up, remember, in this model, you're spending all your money. So now you're at X3 and you're also capable of consuming this Y3 level of goods. So you get more of everything. And what causes you to be able to buy more of everything is the income effect. So the substitution effect is seen from the movement from E1 to E, we call that ES, all right? And the income effect is seen from the movement of ES to E3. The whole movement from E1 to E3 is called the price effect. All right. So as a result of the change in price, you had E1 to E3. But that movement from E1 to E3 is made up of E1 to ES, which is the amount of substitution you would have attempted, and then the income effect as your income rose. Now, did your income really rise? Did your income really rise? The question, guys.
No.
So what changed? If your income didn't rise, what does this income effect measure?
The equilibrium goods. What's the word again?
I don't know. I don't know what you're trying to say. So the income effect is measuring the change in your real income. And what is real income? That is income measured in terms of the quantity of goods and services, G and S, that you could actually buy. All right, that makes sense. So I know this kind of looking scrappy, looking like a blackboard in school.
I'm not gonna say that. It
Huh?
kind of, I'm not gonna say that because watching it, I'm trying to like um understand everything the way you put it, but it kind of confusing.
I know, because we went from here, from this position to this position here, and then I came and I put this here. So it's lacking some planning. All right, so let's see if we can see what I'm talking about here in the diagram that they had on this thingamajig here. So let's see if it looks a little neater now. So what you're seeing here is the initial position is along I, well, they have it labeled as I2. All right. So the income and substitution effect of a rise in price. Okay, so they went the opposite direction to what I did. What I did was they're starting from budget line B1. All right. There's an increase in the price of good X, causing budget line to pivot inwards from B1 to B2. You seeing that there?
Yes, sir.
Right. So it pivoted inside, meaning that the price of the good X went up, which meant that you could buy less of good X, and that caused your budget line to fall in. So originally you are at this position here. So what now governs you is that you're going to attempt to try to stay at this original level of satisfaction. So you're going to attempt to substitute the now expensive good X for more of good Y, which is now cheaper. So you're going to try to end up moving to this point G here. Now, how did they show that line G? You see this dotted green line here? That is the superimposed budgetary line that takes the slope of the new budget line but brings it back to the original indifference curve that you were on. And this is how you end up with this position here of G. What you notice will be happening here. You gave up this quantity here of good X and try to increase the quantity consumption of good Y to compensate, to try to stay here. But what happens is you'd recognize that if I were to put this here as, let's call this point G up here as this pivot point here, and this is O, the origin. So you'd notice that the area that represents what you can afford has gone from OGB1 down to OGB2. So that means G is no longer in a place that you can actually afford. That makes sense? So that means your real income has fallen because now you are forced to purchase not just less of X, but less of Y to be able to get back into an equilibrium position down here at level H. So you've reduced the consumption of X and Y to be able to get to a level of consumption. And you'd notice that now you've moved backwards from I1 to the I2 here. I would actually call this not I2. I would have called this like -1, just to show a backward movement in terms of the amount of satisfaction. Or we could say this is 20 utils and this is 10 utils here. That makes sense? That making better sense there?
Yes, sir. Yeah, that is it.
Yeah. Now, in the one that I constructed, which was, as I said, still, I only got this instrument that I'm using here last week, and I didn't get a chance to play with it, so I'm not too versed with using it at this point in time. So if we go back to the one I looked at before, here, if we take out all the writing that's around it, Or do you want me to try to do it over again with you guys?
Yeah, you could do it over again if you like.
No, I mean, consider.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Could do it over.
All right, so we could try it again and see. So I'm seeing that I can clear the canvas here. All right, so let's start again. And I'm going to do the version that they have where the price has actually gone down. Gone up, sorry. So I'm going to start by putting in my axes, X, and right, I'll change this. This is weird. It's actually allowing me to draw through the thing. All right. So this is, if we start again, this is our good X, and this is our good Y up here, and this is the origin 0 here, or O. All right, and we're going to start by drawing the first budget line, which begins here and it's really strange, guys, because what's happening is it's actually skipping over the ruler itself. All right, so let me label this now. This is the budget line A, B. We're going to show a change in the price of A to B by going to, sorry, of good X by coming inwards. All right, meaning now that we have a budget line, let's call this AC. So the budget line has moved inwards, indicating that there's an increase in the price of good X. Yeah, make sense?
Yes, sir.
All right. All right, hold on. Get rid of this rubbish here. Right, back to this. All right, so that then takes us to the situation where we move from this indifference curve here, all right, I see 2, but we have to end up going backwards to a new indifference curve here, I see 1. And the reason why I'm saying that is this one might be equal to 20 utils, but this one is equal to 10 utils. So we realize we're moving from position here, from here, this is our initial position of E1, down to a position down here of E2. Okay? Now, we said that the movement from E1 to E2 is made up of 2 effects that the consumer is feeling. The effect of the income effect and the substitution effect. Now, what this simply means is that for us to differentiate between the two, we have to put into the diagram what would be the likely impact of the consumer attempting to try to stay at his first level of satisfaction, which is 20. Okay? Mm-hmm. Now, to do that, what we do is we try to put the impact, we try to put the impact of the change in price, which is, what is the new prices? The new prices is seen from the slope of the line AC. That makes sense? So this is the tricky part for me here. So what we do is we are going to move this line from here, all right, and bring it up to here. It'll be parallel to AC, but we're going to try to stay on our original level of satisfaction. So it's going to be a little off the, let's see where am I? think this looks about parallel to the one above. All right. So we'll call this, I will call this A prime C prime. And you'd realize that this point here is the point of tangency. We'll call that ES. So that what happens is, as the quantity of goods became more expensive, all right, so we were consuming at this level of X, we'll call this X3. And now we're down to this position here of X1, quantity of goods. So the movement from here, from E1 to ES, would represent the attempted substitution by the consumer to try to stay at this current level of satisfaction. So this point here means what we did, we reduced our consumption of the amount of X from X3 to X2 and tried to substitute into that a greater number of the now cheaper goods. So if we start to look, and this is one they didn't do on their own, if we start to look at what was going on here, this is Y2, this is Y3, and this position here is going to give us Y1 quantity of goods. All right. So the first attempt is to reduce here X and increase Y. But what happens? This position here along this indifference curve is now outside the area that is designated as what we can afford. You would notice that the shift of the budget line from AB to AC is now giving us an area that we can afford of only OAC. Seeing that? This triangle here? This position ES is outside. That's because we experience a loss in our income. And that then forces us to have to move to the next lower level of satisfaction that we can afford at this point here, E2. That makes sense? So that's the direction that they were looking at in the other one here. Now, the question you're probably asking is, well, how does a household try to stay at this level here? Well, what happens when people want to stay at a certain level of consumption, but they're having problems? They borrow money, not so. They go into their savings, or they start to try to live on credit. How many of you all have credit cards?
I have.
Right. So credit allows you to consume goods and services beyond what you have available, not so?
Yes, sir.
Right. And unfortunately, you end up in a situation where you tend to be experiencing difficulties managing that credit card because you're always living in constant debt. And that's because you're attempting to stay at a level of preferred consumption of bundles of goods and services that your actual income cannot manage anymore. Because either A, your income hasn't changed, or B, prices are rising around you, which is the reality. Because prices are rising around you, then what ends up happening is that you have a situation where you're experiencing falling levels of real income. That's why when people are looking at negotiating wage increases, trade unions talk about the cost of living. The cost of living is actually measured through the rate at which prices are rising. We call that the inflation rate. You all familiar with that? You ever heard that before?
Yes, sir.
Right.
Yeah, inflation.
So we look at the rate of inflation, and that is actually telling us that as prices continue rising around us, our real income can no longer afford the level of the current levels of satisfaction that our household was previously experiencing. All right. Is this diagram clearer, guys? Is it showing you the impact? A little clearer. I think I get a little better with this tablet.
Yes, sir.
All right. So as I said before, the full effect is from E1 to E2. And that's called the price effect. And E1 to ES is the amount of substitution. Or the substitution effect. And then from ES to E2, that is the income effect. That makes better sense there now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it looks a little neater as well too. It actually looks a lot like what I was actually drawing on board at school. Interesting. All right. So that was probably what was causing a lot of headaches in this presentation. Understanding this. So if we go back to this, we say in figure 4.616, the price of normal good X has risen and the budget line has pivoted from B1 to B2. So now we understand that shift backwards. The consumption point has moved from F to H. That's from point F to point H here. Part of this shift in consumption is due to the substitution effect, and part is due to the income effect. So that's what we want to kind of distinguish here. To separate between these two, a new budget line is drawn parallel to B2. See that? Parallel to B2, but tangential to the original indifference curve I1. That's the green budget line, dotted budget line there. All right. Being parallel to B2, it represents the new price ratio. So that's what we're trying to say. If we take the new current price ratios and we superimpose it onto the original indifference curve or the original level of satisfaction we had, we'd see what the consumer will attempt to end up doing in relation to that. Now, being tangential to I2, however, it enables the consumer to attempt to obtain the same utility or satisfaction as before. In other words, there is no loss in real income to the consumer. By focusing then on B1A, see that there, B1A, that's the green line, which represents no change in real income, we have excluded the income effect. So we've taken out the income effect by this shift that we did here. The movement from point F to G, this point here, F to G, is due purely to a change in relative prices of X and Y. The movement from QX1 to QX2 is the substitution effect. So QX1 here to QX2, that's down here. What they're not talking about what's happening on the Y-axis. And on the Y-axis, what's happening is that they're going to give up X, but take up more Y. So if we were to kind of construct a line there, you'd see we'd move from Y2 to Y3 here, okay? But then we're going to end up having to settle for Y1 down here, all right? So that we gave up X, but we added Y, that's substitution, right? So Y went up in this instance here as this went down. Now, they continue. The income effect, in reality, the budget line has shifted to B2, and the consumer is forced to consume on a lower level, I2, because real income has fallen. Thus, the movement from QX1 to QX3, QX2 to QX3 is the income effect. So here they're talking about the shift now from here, QX2, G to H. In the case of a normal good, therefore, the income and substitution effect of a price change reinforce each other. They are both negative. They both involve a reduction in the quantities demanded as price rises and vice versa. So as the price of good X went up, we moved backwards in the quantity of good X that we were buying. We tried to substitute in more of good Y, realize we can't afford it because now the area representing what we can afford is now this area here. And we have to be inside this area or along the curve. So that this area here now gives us this point of new equilibrium here, which is at the lower level of satisfaction at I2. in this case here. This makes better sense now, guys?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so this is just kind of summarizing the whole thing. The proportion or the portion of change in quantities demanded that result from the change in real income, that's the income effect of a price change. The substitution effect of a price change, that is the portion of change in quantities demanded that result from the change in the relative prices of goods. And I defined a real income measured in terms of how much it can buy. If your money income rises by 10%, but prices rise by 8%, you can only buy 2% more goods than before. Your real income has only risen by 2%. So the opposite is also true. If your income does not go up, then you're going to find that as prices rise, your income is falling. So if the rate of inflation, so that's the thing that we talk about. Right now, the rate of inflation is purportedly around 5 to 6%. So if prices are changing by 5 or 6% per year, your income is losing value by 5 or 6% every year once it doesn't change. That makes sense? So it means that's one of the reasons why consumers tend to ask others to ask employers to increase incomes when they're experiencing real income falls, changes because of prices. All right. So and then coming out of the budget, we know that there's going to be some changes to the to prices coming up, at least in the next year. We already have the situation with cars and whatnot. All right. So the last thing that we're going to do here is we're going to use a more extensive price consumption curve to derive an individual demand curve. All right. So what we did here, or what was done in the text here, is that they did four changes in price of good X. So we're only looking at what happens when we change the price of good X. That makes sense there? So you start from B1 to B2 to B3 to B4. So what we're saying is that the price went for good X fell 1, 2, 3 times, okay? That led to us moving along from one indifference curve to another, moving along the positions A to B to C to D. Now, what we used here was something called vertical transfer. So we, at A, Q1, this Q1 quantity of good X was being purchased. At B, Q2. At C, Q3. And at D, Q4. So these prices on this side here represent the prices for each of the different levels. The highest price being when we were at B1. So they call that P1. That was the highest price. So prices went down from P1 to P2, leading to the budget line pivoting outwards to B2. So they have P2 here. Then you'd see the change moving again to B3. That is where P3 is. And B4 was the last price here, P4 in relation to B4. Now that means each point is correlated. So we bring the quantities down. So how much was demanded by the consumer at this budget line here at A was at price here. So the coordinate is going to be P1, Q1. So we bring that information down through vertical summation. Then we bring B down. The point B is brought down by looking at Q2, Q here on the x-axis, and the price that was being charged, P. So we change the axis on this side to measure prices versus quantities. All right, you all follow this piece here? This looking straightforward, or do you want me to deconstruct it for you? You tell let me know if you want to deconstruct it.
So you could further explain it.
All right, so I think that means who's that? Who's asking?
Kiva Hamilton Sue.
Sorry, my dear. What's up, Buffin? Is be saying. All right. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna try and reconstruct that for you, but I'm not gonna use it to scale. Okay. So again, we start now with a different situation where we have this is the good X here, and this is good Y. All right, so we're going to start with a situation that we have the budget line. So we're only looking at what happens to good X. Now I'm not going to use 4, I'm going to use 3 changes in the budget line so far. See that there? So we create a situation where we have 3 different this is E1, E2, and E3. All right, is that big enough, guys? Can you see it? Or you want me to do it larger? That's okay?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
All right, so we have E1, E2, and E3. Now that gives us 3 values or quantities that we're looking at being consumed here. So we come below now, and what we're doing is we're going to transfer the information from above down below. But on this side now, we're going to be looking at the price of good X. And this side, we're going to be looking at the quantities of good X. So the first thing we're going to do is to translate that information down here. All right. All right, so this is Q1, Q2, and Q3. Now again, what I'm missing here, I have to put in the origins as well. Now on the y-axis, we would have been told, because in order to construct this, we would have said that we have price being originally starts at let's say call it P1, it then moves to P2, and then we had P3. There were 3 changes in price. That allowed us to move from AB to AC to AD. So P1 was the budget, is represented by the budget line AB. P2 is the budget line AC, and P3 is the budget line AD. That's the one down this corner here. All right. Now, so therefore, the highest price is actually P1. So that's how they ended up with P1 in top here. So we say that this point here is P1. The next price is P2. And then the other price is P3. So P1 is related to the quantities being demanded when we are along this first AB line here. So we track that across, and that gives us a point of intersection. We come across here now. That gives us a point of intersection here. Then P2 is with AC. So that brings us from E2 down to Q2 down here. So we come across from P2 and we get to that line, and that gives us this point here. And then P3 is AD. That brings us down this way. And that, if we track that across here, we're going to end up with this position here. Now, what we're going to do is that we're going to connect these points to each other. All right. And that is going to connect from that point to that point and this point to that point. And what we've been able to derive here now, this item down here is an individual demand curve for good X. And this methodology that we're using here is called vertical summation. That makes sense? All right. So we would have had, yes, questions? Now, if we had actual values in there, we could have actually put in the values, but that would have required us being able to put in values for prices and so on, which there are worked examples on your in your textbooks and stuff like that. Just for your information, if you wanted to look for them. All right. So that makes sense, guys.
Yes, sir.
Right. So that's what they were trying to do here in so many different curves and the discussion that's going on, which is deriving the individual demand curve. And that demand curve now allows us to be able to look at the end of the day, this is what we want to be looking at. We want to be looking at how do we get the demand, how do what does the demand curve from an individual look like? And you'd notice that from the diagram here, it's downward sloping from left to right. And that's going to become critical when we start to go into thing. So generally, we're going to find that for every individual, we're going to end up with a downward sloping curve like that. And then, right, so we're at the end of the thing here. So what we did was both the marginal utility analysis and the indifference curves analysis gave rise to the same demand curve. Isn't that true? In the marginal utility theory, if we go back up to that, you remember in the diagrams that we're looking at here, you see it here? This is the marginal utility curve that's downward sloping, and this is the individual demand curve. So that part of the marginal utility curve is also downward sloping as well. It makes sense? So when we derive the individual demand curve from the indifference, we end up with this downward shaped curve here as well. Same kind of thing. It's just that in one method, we utilize the marginal utility approach. In the other method, we use the indifference curves approach. The indifference curves approach is a little more difficult, a little tricky, because it requires that the analysis be brought up with a lot more information. That makes sense, guys? All right?
Yes.
All right, so let me minimize this. I'll leave that on for now. Turn back on my camera. Hey, we lost a couple people along the way. All right, so anything else you all want to look at in relation to this? Is it making sense? Better sense now?
Yes.
Yes, sir. Understand.
Somewhat so, yeah.
All right, so you do have to pay attention to the content and kind of look at things on your own a little bit. So the question is, do you want me to extend the time for the quiz for this unit? I know some people did attempt it, but if you want, I can extend it maybe by a week or so, and give you more time to go through the material if you want, because I'm getting ready to start loading the next set of information for you guys. Would that be useful?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so what the other thing I'll do is I'll start putting the deadline dates on the tags, either labeling it so that there will be information right on the face of the class, so that you can kind of look at it and see it a lot faster. So that I'd sort of put things like the date for when the quiz closes here, and that kind of stuff. I forgot, I'm not sharing the screen right now. Sorry about that. All right, but I'll try and put in more information for you guys. Anybody has any further questions they want to ask? We've been going for nearly, well, a little less than 3 hours. Anybody has any questions? Anything they want clarified?
How many times we get into?
I think I opened it up to 3.
No, sir. For the individual assignment, the first one.
Okay.
I know you have. Okay, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. Ask your question.
So I was going to say, I know normally you give us like the draft, and then we have to submit the final one. So I just want to know if it's still like that.
It is, but let's see. What day are we looking at to submit that? And this is probably one of the things that we want to look at. The individual assignment is due. All right, the individual assignment is due the 8th of November. So, you know, like before, like the end of the month, guys, by about the end of October, you all should probably send them. Now, don't post these into the classroom. You have to email them, email your drafts to me, following the same kind of requirements that we had before, so that I could kind of give you some guidelines as to what to fix on the online classroom.
So Sonny,
The 8th of November, sir?
Okay, I need one person at a time.
Yeah, so hear me?
Yes, I am.
So Sonny, so if I do any the draft, so send a draft to the custard email, to your custard email?
Either one, the custard or my personal, anyone. But don't post it in the classroom yet. This is
okay.
the deadline here. The reason why I don't want you posting it in the classroom is because that's gonna. Where am I here? That's gonna, you see, if you post it here, where you should be posting it is at this point here, the submission point, to try and work out your whether or not you have whether or not you have similarity issues. So that's something you can do. So as we right, because you're supposed to be able to submit and then resubmit and that kind of stuff. But the point being is that I kind of want to give you all some guidelines in relation to the content of your response rather than just simply looking at your final thing only. All right. So the same thing with your journal. Oh, speaking of the journal, right now there's a great time for you guys to be gathering articles, because with the budget just occurring and the whole situation with COVID and whatnot, I mean, there are lots of articles for you all to be gathering. You all remember that journal article thing, right? You're supposed to take a newspaper article and evaluate it. Okay. So don't submit them here, but email it to me before, so I could give you a, I could always just call you up and say, hey, this is the so and so and so and whatnot, that kind of stuff. And we could have a little one-to-one session if possible. Or we could even use a class session to go through individually some general guidelines and then deal with some specifics afterwards. That makes sense?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
All right. Okay, so are there any further questions that people want to ask?
No, sir.
We're clear on what's going on with the assignments and stuff, right?
Yes.
So the journal, if you're taking from the newspaper itself, you have to put the information.
You have to cite the article.
The article and the date?
You have to cite the article and get me some access. So if you're
so therefore that means you have to go online then to get a citation.
Well, how do you get citation for anything? It's where you have to go to the publisher and get what the publisher did. All right, and who's the publisher for your product and whatnot. Now, I have to approve your articles first. That has to happen. Don't just go and choose articles. You need to send me a link to your article so that I can approve the article, because I don't want you wasting time with an article that's not relevant to this course, but is relevant to something else. Okay?
Okay, sir.
This is microeconomics, so there you have to kind of drill a little down, because the budget and stuff like that is generally macroeconomic in nature, but there are microeconomic issues that come up from macroeconomic issues as well. Right?
So,
yeah. You see?
And the article would be based on the budget and COVID.
No, it could be based on anything that you want. But what I'm saying is that right now, there's a lot of opportunities for you to utilize the current articles that are coming up as a result of people responding to the budget presentation. You have lots of good articles and a lot of good contributors. Not just people talking off the top of their head, but economists and university lecturers and people doing analysis on the budgets at this point in time that you can utilize as stimulus. And then journalists are actually doing some investigation to check and see, you know, what the impact is going to be, what's this kind of stuff. So like for instance, you see that thing with Price Plaza closing, Movie Town closing down? That's a big microeconomic that has a lot of that has a lot of microeconomic implications for the Chaguanas area, as well as just demand and supply and availability of goods and services. So when we start to look at demand and supply, you'll actually see that those things are kind of important there. Making sense? So those are the things you can utilize to be able to treat with the journal assessment. That makes sense?
Yes, sir.
All right. Anybody else has a question? Anyone clarification? Again, if you have further questions, you could always email it to me or put it in the group chat or message me privately if you have anything. All right. So with that, I want to call it Jorge for the evening. And I will extend the limit for the quiz to give you a little more time with this content to try to make an attempt with it. All right?
Okay, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay,
All right. Yeah. Good night. Thanks for coming.
Bye, sir. Enjoy your
Good night, sir. Have a blessed night.
Enjoy your night.
Yes,
Good night, guys.